Warriors are champions of faith. They know and trust that their supernatural power emanates from a courageous faith in an extraordinary God. Hebrews chapter 11 in the Bible focuses on the power of our bold faith. Verse 1 starts by defining what faith is. And it says, "Now faith brings our hopes into reality and becomes the foundation needed to acquire the things we long for." It's all the evidence required to prove what is still unseen. And that's from the Passion Translation. But throughout the book of Hebrews, the author, Paul, recounts one example after another of how faith empowered ordinary men and ordinary women to live extraordinary lives. And these biblical heroes lived victoriously in their purpose and their destiny because of their faith in God to fulfill His promises in their lives. Verse 4 says that faith moved Abel to choose a more acceptable sacrifice to offer God than his brother Cain. And God declared him righteous because of his offering of faith. According to verse 5, faith lifted Enoch from his life, and he was taken up to heaven, and he never had to experience death. He just disappeared from the world because God promoted him. In verse 7, faith opened Noah's heart to receive revelation and warnings from God about what was coming, even things that had never been seen. And Noah built an ark that would save him and his family as a result. In verse 8, we see that faith motivated Abraham to obey God's call and leave the familiar land to discover the territory that he was destined to inherit from God. And we know where that ended up. Sarah's faith embraced the miracle power to conceive, even though she was barren and was past the age of childbearing. For the authority of her faith rested in the one who made the promise, and she tapped into His faithfulness. And that's verse 11, right below. It keeps going on and on and on. Verse 23 tells us that faith prompted the parents of Moses at his birth to hide him for 3 months because they realized that their child was exceptional. And they refused to be afraid of the king's edict, which had called for all the firstborn of the Hebrew people to be killed. In verse 29, faith opened the way for the Hebrews to cross the Red Sea as if they were on dry land. But when the Egyptians tried to cross, they were swallowed up and drowned. We all know that story. Faith pulled down Jericho's walls after the people marched around them for 7 days. Another miracle. Faith provided a way of escape for Rahab the prostitute, avoiding the destruction of the unbelievers because she received the Hebrew spies when they came to her, and she received them in peace and took care of them when they were scouting out the land. And that's in verses 30 and 31. Paul recounts more examples in verses 32 through 35, and he says, "There's just not enough time to tell you of the faith of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the other prophets. Through faith's power, they conquered kingdoms and established true justice. Their faith fastened onto their promises and pulled them into reality. It was faith that shut the mouths of lions, put out the power of the raging fire, and caused many to escape certain death by their sword. In their weakness, their faith imparted power to make them strong. Faith sparked courage within them, and they became mighty warriors in battle, pulling armies from another realm into battle array." I just love the way he says that. It's so powerful. And he concludes in verses 38 and 40 by saying, or 38 to 40, by saying, "Truly the world was not even worthy of them. Didn't realize who they were. These were the true heroes, commended for their faith. Now God has invited us to live in something better than what they had in faithfulness. This is so that they could be brought to finished perfection alongside of us." Every one of these heroes were ordinary men and women who lived extraordinary lives because they were centered in and fueled by bold faith. They bravely took risks, and they willingly left the comfortable, the safe, and the familiar to follow God's calling. And we're called to live by that same faith that launches us into our own unique purpose and destiny today. Yet most of us don't ever see God's miracles or promises fulfilled in our lives because we aren't willing to trust and believe for what we can't prove or what we can't see. There's a big difference in saying that we have faith and living by faith. Living in bold faith is out of the ordinary. And too many of us believe intellectually in God and say that we believe He can do miracles, but we don't trust that He really can or that He will in our lives today. So we aren't willing to take risk and put our full trust in Him. But God calls us to live a purpose-driven, extraordinary life. And He desires to perform those same and similar supernatural miracles in our lives just as He did for the biblical heroes. Nothing has changed over time. But we must choose to step out of our comfort, out of our habit, and out of our security to experience those miracles. Living in bold faith won't always feel safe, and it will never feel sturdy. But abiding in God's will and His power is the surest way to experience God's greatest miracles and the fulfillment of our destiny. It's time to close the gap between the life that God promises us and the mundane existence that we're settling for. We're either growing or we are dying. We are either surviving or we're living fully alive. We are either writing our own smaller stories or thriving in the larger story that God is writing for us. So I ask you, does your faith in God change the way that you live your life? We are the ordinary, called into the extraordinary. Are you willing to offer up your ordinary to allow God to do the extraordinary in your life? Will you commit to doing the inner work to cultivate your faith so that you live in abiding trust and full dependence on His power and His sovereignty? God has destined you to be a great hero, a champion, a warrior fueled by bold, supernatural faith. Will you answer the call?